Welcome back to another episode of Titletown Talk with your host, Jackson Tolliver. Thanks so much for tuning in during March Madness. There's definitely been some madness occurring in that tournament with Yale, upsetting Auburn, Oakland upsetting Kentucky. So a lot of great stuff there that I won't talk about on a Boston sports podcast because, of course, we don't have any Massachusetts teams in that tournament. UMass Lowell was so close. They were this close. They were one game away. But no Massachusetts teams in there, unfortunately. Let's get right into it. We're going to start off with the Celtics. Now I have a very special guest today, Chris Forsberg, insider at NBC Sports Boston. But before we get into that, I will go over the games that have taken place over the last few days since I last recorded, and I'll preview the games coming up this week as always. So first off, we have a hefty defeat of the Detroit Pistons, 129-102. That was on Friday night. Yeah, this was a pretty expected win for the Celtics, even though they didn't have a lot of their guys playing. Payton Pritchard, oh my goodness, he has been so good. Not only in that game, but for these last couple weeks, this whole month really, he's been solid. In his starts, he's averaging close to what Steve Nash averaged in his second MVP season. They mentioned on the NBC broadcast last night, so really impressive stuff from him. He had 20 and 9 on this night, just one assist shy of a double-double. Jaylen Brown led the team. Tatum didn't play in this one, so Jaylen Brown took over. He had 33 points. Good to see from him, that aggression. Derek White, back on Monday last Monday, against the Pistons, he had a triple-double. He almost did it again. He had 19, 11, and 8. He was just 2 rebounds shy of his second ever career triple-double, and how funny would it have been if it was against the same lowly Detroit Pistons. It was a really good second quarter for the C's. They pulled away, had a pretty sizable lead by halftime. They won the next 2 quarters as well. They just never looked back. Just pure domination from the Celtics is what you want to see. I don't think anyone was really expecting this to be a close game, even with all the starters resting. But I will give a shout out to James Wiseman of the Pistons. Obviously, his career hasn't panned out the way that he's wanted it to, or that many people expected. He was that second overall pick back in 2020 to the Golden State Warriors. Technically did win a ring because he was on the team when the Warriors beat the Celtics back in 2022. But he didn't play at all that year. He was dealing with some sort of injury. But he was later dealt to the Pistons, and he had a great game. He had 26 points. Yeah, 26 points. Terrific first half. Most of those points came in the first half. And it sort of got me thinking about the overall way that Celtics defend bigs this year. And I don't want to overreact because it's James Wiseman and it's a one-off. But I am slightly concerned with the Celtics' overall ability to defend bigs in the playoffs. And when I say bigs, I mean, Embiid, Giannis, Jokic, you can't really defend at all. Nobody can defend Jokic. But Jokic has given the Celtics serious problems this year. And that sort of concerns me because I think losing Grant Williams was someone who was really good at defending big men. Like Grant Williams on Giannis was a really good matchup. Al Horford has always been a really good matchup on Giannis and Embiid, but obviously he's slowing down with age. I guess not offensively if we're going off the last few games, but defensively. And obviously he's coming off the bench now, so you don't really get him picking on those big guys from the jump. Porzingis isn't the best at defending big men. I think Porzingis is a really good help defender, and he's a decent post defender just because of his length. He's definitely good on smaller players. The only way he gets beat is really by speed. Like if someone's driving to the basket, they can get by him because he doesn't have the speed that those guys will have, but he's a great shot blocker, as we've seen from him all season long. Great at protecting the rim. But in terms of their ability to defend a bigger guy of a high caliber, I'm slightly concerned. Not just because of James Wiseman, putting up over 20 points in the first half, but just a trend that I've sort of noticed all season long that, the Celtics are great at guarding guards because we have Jrue Holiday and Derek White, which is the best defensive backcourt in the NBA by far. So I'm very confident in that. I'm just a little bit concerned about guarding bigger guys. Jaylen Brown's also been great at guarding more forward type players. Tatum's been good on defense this year. So it really comes down to are they going to be able to guard a big man? And we'll see when it comes to playoff times. Because obviously, yeah, I mentioned Porzingis. I don't want to give him, I don't want to take too much away from him because he is still a better defensive player than people give him credit for. But overall, I'm a little bit concerned with that aspect. But regardless, going back to this game against the Pistons, there's not much to talk about. There's not much to harp on here. Pretty easy win, as you would expect. Now, last night's game, Saturday night's game against the Bulls, which came right after the Pistons game, it was on a back-to-back was a lot more challenging and a lot more entertaining. The Celtics were able to power away at the end there, get a win 124-113. It was definitely a more exciting game than we've seen, besides that Bucks game, which was a ridiculously exciting game. It was a more exciting game than we've seen from the Celtics in the past few weeks. Tatum led with 26. Fine night from him. Nothing to write home about by his standards. Al Horford, I mentioned before that he was slowing down, but showing no signs of this offensive production. 23 points on 50% shooting from both the field and from three-point land. So great stuff from him. I love seeing Al shine offensively. He is just such a dependable scorer in terms of, a catch and shoot guy. But I mean, last night he was driving to the rack. He was hitting pump fakes. I mean, he was just all over the place last night. So it was really good to see, and all over the place in a good way. Just scoring from a lot of different levels. So great to see from him. Al Horford's going to be huge in this playoff run, as he always is. The Celtics did rest Jrue Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, and Jaylen Brown on the second half of the back-to-back. Jrue Holiday is still dealing with that dead arm injury. I talked to Forsberg about that, which we'll get to in just a few minutes here. But nothing too serious there, I don't think. But regardless, those guys are sitting, so Tatum and Horford, really great performances from them. Derek White, as always, reliable, dependable. Hit some pretty big shots down the stretch to help the Celtics put it away. Sam Hauser really regaining his confidence in just his second game back, knocking down 7 threes. Obviously, he missed the last few games. He came back against the Pistons on Friday and had a pretty solid outing, but last night was ridiculous, getting back to that form he had against the Wizards. 7 threes, so really good stuff from him. I was really impressed with O'Shea Brissett, who I know isn't going to be a significant part of the Celtics playoff rotation, barring any injuries, but his ability to get offensive rebounds is so impressive to me. I mean, he just has such a knack for where the ball is going to go. He plays with such energy and physicality, always has a great attitude, so really like what I've seen from O'Shea Brissett. He's someone who, to me, really exemplifies Celtics basketball and that next man up sort of mentality and, giving it all for the team, which I think that this year's players have done a really good job doing, sacrificing, whatever it is for themselves, right? O'Shea could have went to a different team and been a starter maybe, or gotten a lot more playing time, but he came here. It obviously was clear to him that he wasn't going to be a every night part of the rotation, but he has a great attitude, and whenever his number's called, he does a great job. So I love seeing that from really all the bench guys. I haven't heard of any, toxic environment or anything other than positivity from the guys who, they call them the stay ready crew, the O'Shea Brissett and the, Xavier Tillman, even Jaden Springer, who really only comes in at like the tail end of a game. He's in that category with Jordan Walsh and J.D. Davison. He's a little bit above them, but yeah, I mean, I just love the attitude of those players who come off the bench. But O'Shea was really, really impressive, no matter how you cut it. He's just so good on the offensive glass. So really impressive stuff from Brissett, and I honestly feel comfortable with him if someone had to miss a game during the playoffs, like Jalen or Jayson had to sit out a game during the playoffs. I feel comfortable with the depth that the Celtics have. I would love to see O'Shea Brissett get a run in some way during the playoffs because I think he's a really talented player. Obviously, I don't want anyone to get injured, but if that were to happen, I would feel pretty comfortable with Brissett soaking up some of those minutes to fill that hole. The depth on this team is just it's just so good. I'm just really comfortable with it, honestly. Andre Drummond hit the too small on Luke Kornet, and this is something that needs to be addressed. Why has this happened 2 times this week? Luke Kornet is just, I don't know the guy personally, but just from what I've seen, seems to be the most gracious, kind, funny, likable guy on the team, maybe. He's just I've never seen anyone say a bad thing about Luke Kornet besides, roasting him for his play on the court. But he's also done a great job these last couple weeks, so I don't understand why people are doing the too small on him. It's just disrespectful, and I hate it. I mean, pick another guy to do it on. You can do it on JT. You can do it on JB. You can do it on someone who actually has this like all-star potential. Even Payton, I get it because he is smaller than the rest of the guys on the court. But don't do it to Luke Kornet. I mean, come on. This is just a bad look. And he's never going to... I don't know if people are trying to get a rise out of him, but it's not going to happen. I remember a couple months ago, there was a game against the Pacers where someone was trying to chirp Luke Kornet or something. I'm trying to remember. Was it Isaiah Jackson? I think it was Isaiah Jackson on the Pacers. They were trying to chirp Luke Kornet, and he just laughs it off. Like, you'll never see Luke Kornet get aggressive with someone, ever. I mean, this guy's he has such a dad personality. He tells dad jokes all the time. He actually has kids, and he just seems to be such a, like he's not going to get in with that kind of disrespect. He's just not going to get into it with people because that's not him. He's a very mild-mannered, chill, easygoing guy. So people need to stop picking on Kornet, man. It's getting me a little bit angry. Leave my guy alone, all right? Regardless, this win against the Bulls is big considering the fact that the Celtics were resting 3 starters. I would love to have the Bulls in the first round. We just got the season sweep on them last night. There was obviously that game early in the season where it was still the play-in tournament and the Celtics needed to win big to advance, and they were able to do that. So I think in a playoff environment where the stakes are high, the Celtics should easily be able to sweep or gentleman sweep the Bulls. When I say gentleman sweep, I mean 4-1. So I would love to see them round 1. I don't think it's going to happen because they have to win 2 games in the play-in tournament, it looks like, to be able to lock up that 8 seed and face the Celtics round 1, assuming that the Celtics will win 1 more game and clinch the East, which is all they need. They need 1 more win to clinch the Eastern Conference 1 seed. Crazy that it's not even April yet and they're already in a position to clinch, but that's just how it's shaken out this year. The Celtics have been far and away the best team, not only in the East, but in the NBA in terms of their record and their consistency. So great regular season. Obviously has to translate to playoff victory, but I would love to face the Bulls round 1. I think that would be a relatively easy matchup for the Celtics. Nothing's easy in the NBA, but based off what we've seen, especially after last night's win, when they're as healthy as they're going to be, they don't have Lonzo Ball and Zach LaVine, but those guys aren't coming back this season. So they're as healthy as they're going to be, and the Celtics would, ideally have all their starters back. I would love to see that playoff series. I think it would be very easy for the Celtics. Coming up, we only have 1 game before I tape next on Thursday. That is Atlanta on Monday. It's the first of 2 games in Atlanta against the Hawks. This should be an easy one for the Celtics. Trae Young won't be back yet. I anticipate him coming back sometime in the next few weeks, but this should be a home run for the Celtics. They should win it by 10 to 20, depending on who's available. I don't anticipate the Hawks giving them any problems at all. Jalen Johnson has really emerged this year for the Hawks, and he's been a great guy slotted in at that power forward position. Really high flying. He's got some crazy good poster dunks. Probably has one of the top 5 dunks on the year, which last week he dunked on Austin Reeves on the Lakers. That was a really good dunk. So, expect some highlights from him. But regardless, I think the Celtics should take that one pretty easily. And then I'll preview the second Hawks game based on what happens on Monday in the episode on Thursday. All right, welcome back. I am thrilled to be joined today by the one and only Chris Forsberg. If you've watched the Celtics game over the past, is it a decade yet? How long have you been there?
It's 5 years now with NBC Sports Boston.
Yeah.
I joined ESPN back in 2009.
Yep. Awesome.
Yeah, it's been a while.
You've definitely seen his face if you've watched a Celtics game recently. So let's get right into it. I'd love to pick your brain about a few things. Starting off with, I know that you are the self-proclaimed president of the Robert Williams fan club. When you look back on that trade that happened this past offseason, can you, of all people, as the number 1 Robert Williams supporter, admit that it was a good trade?
Yeah, it didn't feel great in the moment. There's a great story. So if you go back in the archives of Celtics Talk podcast, that morning we had been trying to set something up with Rob, and ironically, so he was on his way to the Celtics facility that morning.
Really?
We did a probably 20-minute interview from his car at his home here in the Boston area, and just like how refreshed he was, how good he felt, like a lot of positivity. He goes to the Celtics facility. I'm like, we end the interview and I say, hey, everything good? Yep. I go and play golf with my buddies, and we're like 4 holes in, and I get the text like, hey man, they're going to trade your buddy Rob. And I was like, oh no. In that moment, as I'm lying catatonic on one of the greens that we started like at the 14th hole. So I think we were on the 18th hole, and I was despondent in the moment. Undeniably, the Celtics are just, as they've shown over the course of 70 games now, they are the best team in basketball by a landslide. And it would be hard for me to argue otherwise. I do think long-term, Rob's salary, Rob's potential, like I'll always wonder what could have been. And I'll always continue to badger Brad Stevens that he should go sign or bring back Rob Williams at some point, whatever the trade has to be. But big Marcus Smart guy as well. Like losing those 2 guys was hard, but undeniably they have gone to another level. The ceiling has increased, and you've made it even more of a real possibility to obtain banner 18, which is ultimately the bottom line. And even if it had to come at the expense of Rob Williams.
Yeah, Rob is such a tough one, and Marcus obviously too. But Rob was so fun to watch. The problem was obviously the injuries, and we've seen him this year. Really unfortunate, out for the year. Smart hasn't played in like 2 months.
Yeah,
I don't know what's
I
going on
mean,
with that, but
it's so weird. Like, and in Brogdon too, right? Like
yeah,
Brogdon got the
exactly.
elbow injury. And so like Brad traded everybody and they just decided to not play basketball this year. So
Yeah,
Brad is a wizard of some degree. And the fact that Kristaps Porzingis has been healthier than just about everybody you traded for is just completely wild and just shows that maybe Boston's bad luck with injuries and such has, and I'm going to knock on every
yeah,
piece of wood in that
heavy
room
knock
here,
on wood with that
right?
one. Yeah, yeah. So far, so good. But on the topic of injuries, it just came out yesterday. Jrue Holiday dealing with some dead arm. Is that anything that you're concerned about long term, or is that more of a short term thing from your
Yeah,
knowledge?
I think the description of the injury is more daunting than the actual injury. Like if you go back and watch the play, he definitely gets kind of clipped. It felt like one of those plays where a guy's shoulder pops out and they got to go pop it back in, and usually, so there's some degree of soreness there and such. But he was on the court, kind of warming up in Chicago. I feel pretty good about. You have a couple weeks here to make sure he's feeling good. Certainly, everyone flashes back to last year and Malcolm Brogdon getting hurt for that playoff run, and you get a little PTSD from that. But I don't worry too much about it. Of course, the one it's so funny though, because like Drew's shooting so well, especially from the corner, 64%, whatever the ridiculous number
Best in the
is.
NBA, right? I think
Yeah.
still. Yeah.
So you start saying like, oh, is it going to affect his shooting? Like, will he be the same player? And when I was watching our monitors in the studio here as he was knocking down shots in the warm up, I say, okay, that doesn't mean he's going to knock him down in the game, but maybe not as kind of daunting as a dead arm seems to suggest.
Yeah, it's a fine line you want to toe with getting these guys back so they stay in their rhythm, but also the Celtics have this one seed pretty much locked down. So it's you're trying to toe that line. And I guess sticking on that subject, like, do you anticipate us seeing a full Celtics roster again before the regular season ends? Like that full starting five and Al Horford as well? I don't
Like
know.
so if I'm Joe Mazzulla, I want to see it at least a couple more times. They had a little dip probably January, February,
Yeah.
where the first probably 15 games that they had the starters, it was like, wow, these guys are the same wrecking ball that we sort of saw at the end of the 22 season when Rob came back from injury and the Celtics starters just sort of launched. So that was really encouraging. But, I couldn't put my finger on why the downturn was. Since then, Jaylen Brown has been fantastic, and I'm eager to see just, finding that chemistry and making sure everybody knows where their touches are coming from, like making sure everybody feels comfortable with their minutes and how they're being utilized. So I would hope that even if the games aren't the sexiest, you can get them out there for some sort of run. What we've seen from the Celtics is generally like, okay, not all bodies might be available, but whoever is out there is gonna give it their best and find a way to be dominant out there. But yeah, give me like 3 or 4 games where you got that group and they can sort of maybe even one night where you just play playoff minutes and everybody's like, oh wow, like Tatum 40 minutes, whatever the case may be. Then I'll feel good because you're going to downshift during that play-in week, and then you got to be ready to go depending on who's on the other side.
Yeah, maybe that Bucks. There's one more Bucks matchup, so that might be the one where they go full force. So on the topic of people sitting out, there's been one guy who's consistently played. That's Payton Pritchard. I read your piece yesterday where you sort of crunched some of the numbers of his career year. I mean, without a doubt, this is the best year that he's had. How important do you think he is to this Celtics playoff run? Where do you think he emerged from this season as a real solid offensive contributor?
It's kind of crazy, right? Because it's so easy to forget when he's played every game this season and he's been super impactful the last few weeks to like roll back to February of last year where wasn't playing, was the fourth guard on the depth chart, like openly pined for a trade so that he would have that opportunity. And that's just the competitor in him coming through. He wants to be out there. He wants to be a key contributor for a team, regardless of like what their situation is, but especially when they're competing for a title. And so, and then you go through the box scores in February and March. He didn't play. He was like an inactive for half of March last year. It's mind boggling really to think about that. He just didn't have a spot on that team. Now speaks to how good Derek White is, Marcus, Derek White obviously having the role he did. And there wasn't a lot of minutes for a fourth guard. It's such a luxury now to just throw him in there, and whether it's with the armband on or whatever the case may be, he's been fantastic. And credit to Payton for hanging in there, getting rewarded with the contract before the season or early in the season. And just making the most of it, because you could have easily gone sideways, could have easily gotten frustrated, could have easily turned into a bad situation. But both sides, by kind of waiting it out, were rewarded. And it's a situation where, there's some uncertainty about long-term future for Jrue and stuff like that. So maybe there's an even more roadmap for Payton to be an impactful guy here. If nothing else, if he can play like he has lately and give you something in the playoffs, that's huge for this team.
Yeah, that game against the Bucks where he was going at it with Pat Bev and he was, hit the step back on Gallinari.
Don't do the too small on Payton.
Don't do it.
Get you.
Well, yeah, but he also did it on Luke Cornett, which I was like, that's the guy you're gonna do it to, Patrick Beverley. Like you're gonna do it on this 7'1" or whatever. Like, I love Luke Cornett. I think he's played great recently, but that's not the guy that you do that to. That's just ridiculous.
But that's why Payton was mad, because Luke has been so good, and like of all people, I always tell people this. You don't understand how big Luke is until you're around him. Like he's 7'2", but he's just tree trunks for legs, and just a gigantic human being in general. And so I get like why players do that. The too small is like the worst thing you can do against an NBA player, because they're generally gigantic people. But yeah, he picked the wrong spot. You don't give, I don't so much. You don't give, it doesn't matter if you give Luke more motivation. He's just going to do what he does. Don't get Payton fired up, because once Payton's fired up, man, he just wants to slice and dice you, and he sure did that game.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I wish we had time to talk about every player on the roster, but let's jump up to the top. Stephen A. Smith said the other day that Jaylen Brown is the best second option in the NBA. What do you think about that, objectively speaking? I know you're a Celtics reporter, but do you think that there's merit to that? Do you think he is the second best, the best second option, rather, in the NBA?
I would say since the All-Star break, I'm not sure there's many first options that have played as good as Jaylen Brown has, and it's been really refreshing to see him sort of dial it in. Feels like the right time of year to start taking it up a little bit. I think in general, it's hard to argue that there's a lot of teams that have someone you could throw in that 1A, 1B conversation. He's always invariably going to be that 1B because Tatum is so good and he's in the MVP conversation. But you start running it down, and especially when you do the MVP, it's like, there's nobody that you would say is in that conversation from Philly, even Oklahoma City with all their talent, like SGA, and then there's a drop. Luka, there's a drop. Even the Kyrie, who's, for all his warts, and it is still an amazing basketball player. When you start looking at what the first two players that slot on an all NBA team will be, it does feel like Jaylen's probably the most likely to be a second teamer, even with Jayson trending towards first or second team himself. And I feel like we don't appreciate enough what Jaylen Brown does, and yet he'd be the first one to admit, like, there's still ways to grow his game and to be more impactful. Part of the reason that we always wonder if guys will get a wandering eye, like, what would Jaylen be like if he could be the focal point of a team, if he got 25 shots a game instead of settling some nights for 13 or 15 shots. And, but yeah, like I'm even trying to think who would be the next closest 1B in this league, like Kawhi and Paul George. Like there's definitely talent out there, but the way Jaylen's played the last probably month since the All-Star break, yeah, he's decidedly that guy.
I think you could argue for Dame as well over in Milwaukee, but
if you were doing a draft and then you'd hold it against Dame based on his age, hasn't had the most consistent season, but
and the defensive
in a
aspect
vacuum,
of it too.
Yeah, I absolutely see what you're saying, because Dame does crazy Dame things.
Yeah, I'm nervous for that potential Eastern Conference Finals matchup. Now, you mentioned Tatum being in MVP talks. Do you think there's a realistic chance he ever wins MVP if this roster stays the same? It's obviously not going to be this year, but next year, in the future, if the roster stays the same.
Yeah, so it's definitely a little bit more difficult. You don't get the number of shots that a Luka gets, or even an SGA. But although, I start wondering about that Oklahoma City team, as good as SGA has been this year, like Chet and everybody, they're going to kind of grow into their roles and be more focal points of the offense at some point. But yeah, like Tatum is just going to have the argument for Tatum will always be the success of the team, his willingness to sacrifice in some instances. And so it's a little bit of a harder sell than, necessarily a guy like Luka, who's just everything goes through him and every possession has to have him touching the ball and all that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's just different here where you have options and he can have a quiet quarter and you don't necessarily suffer from it. So I won't say he can't ever get to that point. It's just going to be a difficult roadmap for him because of the talent here.
All right. My last question for you. We're obviously a month away from playoffs, less than a month now, I think.
Mm.
Give me one team, East or West,
Ooh.
that you think has the best chance of stopping the Celtics in a 7-game series. Who's the biggest obstacle for Banner 18?
Yeah, the easy answer is Denver, just because they've done it. We've seen it twice in the regular season that, they're a tough matchup. Jokic is the best player on earth, and, you don't have a great answer for that, even though you feel like overall you can match up pretty well with them and it would be a very competitive series. But certainly they are the biggest roadblock. And it's, I sometimes remind myself, you can't just skip to Celtics Denver in the finals, even if it feels like that's just the way it's trending. In the East, if Lillard gets hot, to your point about him being the second best player, like I can see that series being competitive. I just don't know defensively if they can hold up over this against this team. Like the Celtics are just so good on both ends. I think they can dig in defensively to a level that the Bucks just cannot. If Embiid comes back and is somehow miraculously something like pre-injury Embiid without lingering effects of a meniscus, which we saw with Rob can linger. So I guess my answer would be I don't see anybody that necessarily screams, in the East at least, definite impediment to where they want to get to. Sometimes I think it comes back to the Celtics and just staying out of their own head, avoiding the 2-week slump shooting wise that they went against Miami. But if they play to their potential, there's no one that should be able to deter them until at least they get to Denver. And then that'll be fun. Then we'll get a good knockdown, drag it out 7-game series. And I'll be very interested to see how that one tips.
Yeah, I mean, I always say that we don't have an answer for Jokic, but I don't think anybody does in the whole NBA. No. So you got to just contain him and
your
really
hope is that you have an answer for their bench, which was weirdly really good against you in that trip out there. So
yeah, it was bizarre. We didn't win the non-Jokic minutes, so it is what it is.
That's what and you got to do it. I think the Celtics came away from the first meeting feeling really good about themselves. Second one, they were like, damn, like you just didn't take advantage of some of the opportunities, but. Man, I know for sure they'd love another crack at it, and there's only one way to do that.
They might get it. We'll see. Well, Chris Forsberg, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate you coming out and taking the time.
Jackson, thank you.
All right. Now, I feel like I need to stop giving the Bruins credit when they do something well, because every time it happens and I go, oh, this is, they're at their best. This is so great. They look like they're ready for the playoffs. They drop all their games before my next episode. And that's exactly what happened this week. I was giving the Bruins all the praise on Thursday, and then they dropped 2 in a row. Now, in fairness, the game on Thursday night against the Rangers, that's a really tough opponent. Potential Eastern Conference Finals matchup, if the Bruins can get there, realistically. The Rangers look really good, and that was a really good game for them. 5-2 was the final score. It wasn't as bad as that score would make it seem. It was really 3-2 until the final stretch, and the Rangers were able to score 2 empty netters. But this was still an embarrassment on home ice. The Bruins need to win this one, because now they needed to win it. They didn't win. Now they've gotten swept by the Rangers, who've just had their number all season long, and it's very daunting to imagine a situation where these two teams face off in the playoffs, because realistically, the Bruins haven't had an answer. Like I said, it's understandable because the Rangers have been so good, but to be swept by them now, that's just not good. And it really raises the question of, would the Bruins be able to hang with them in a 7-game series if they've, if they're 0-3 against them? To be fair, they're 0-2-1. They lost one of them in overtime, but if they're 0-3, if they haven't been able to get a win against them, will they be able to in a playoff series, 4 times, 4 out of 7 times? And I really don't know. It's a team that hasn't matched up well for the Celtics, for the Bruins at all. They haven't been able to produce against them, so I really worry about that. So now they have a chance to move forward, and they're going to be playing some more big dogs as they close out their season, starting with Florida, which I'll talk about. But in terms of, the big dogs of the East, which to me, the Rangers are at the top of that list for competition for the Bruins in the playoffs, it's troubling that they weren't able to get one win against them throughout the regular season. Artemi Panarin really only beat Swayman once, so it's wasn't that big of a deal, because the second time it went on off DeBrusk's stick, and the third one was an empty netter. He did end up recording the hat trick, but it wasn't something of, it wasn't like a highly skilled hat trick that you've seen from other players. One was inadvertent and one was a empty netter. And he said after the game that he was just trying to pass for the second one, and then it happened to go in. So a little bit of misfortune. It was unfortunate for the Bruins to let that one happen. I just felt like they didn't have the grit that they needed down the stretch, and it's been a problem for them the entire season. And it was in the next game against the Flyers where they lost, which I'll talk about in 10 seconds. To me, it just felt like they don't have that grit, that extra motivation to just push them to the finish line. I don't know why. I think fatigue has been a huge issue, and they asked Montgomery about it after the game, and he said, like, we shouldn't be tired because it's not like they have all these games condensed. I mean, they get days off, so why are they acting like it's almost like they're not actually fatigued, but they're just acting like it? I don't know what's happening. They're just running out of gas by the end. And I've mentioned before on the podcast that it might have something to do with the lines, that Jim Montgomery should stagger them more and try to have, for like the first major part of the third period, trust those guys on the deeper lines that really should be able to perform for you at a high level. It hasn't been the stars recently that have been producing. Like recently, it's been Justin Brazeau and like Danton Heinen that have been really pushing for you to get those goals. So I don't know. It's just like it's a bummer to drop that game because it looks really bad. And as you head into the playoffs, you want to have momentum against good teams. But realistically, it's not the end of the world because the Bruins are still leading the race for the President's Cup. But as I mentioned before, it won't be helped by their upcoming schedule. Now, yesterday they did lose to the Flyers in a matinee, 3-2. This is an embarrassing loss because this is a team you just beat the other day. They're on a 7-game losing streak, and you lose to them. And guess what happened? It wasn't an overtime loss like we saw, throughout the early parts of 2024 every single night for some reason. This was a winner with about 1:30 left by the Flyers. It's just another late game collapse, and it goes back to what I mentioned about fatigue for this team. I don't know what it is, but they just seem like lethargic. They just seem like toward the end of the game, they just can't get anything done. They can't give a knockout punch. Instead, they'll take one. And I don't know why. I don't know what it is. It has to be addressed, though, because in the playoffs, like, these games mean way more. I don't have to say that. Everyone knows that. So you can't have this just, like, skating through. Pun intended. You can't just have that attitude of, like, you're going to just push through the regular season games and you're going to, do they care about the President's Cup? I don't know. Do they care about the 1 seed going into the playoffs? I have no idea. It doesn't seem like it based off how these games are ending. And the defense just wasn't good. I mean, Swayman, I didn't even rag on him for that game against the Rangers, but Swayman wasn't great. The defense wasn't great. So you need to be great because at the end, the offense isn't doing enough to make up for the goals that have already went in. And we saw that against the Flyers. The Bruins did enough, but at the end it wasn't enough. Like you think it's enough towards the end of the game because in the third period, if it's knotted up 2-2, you think, okay, the Bruins are such a better team on paper. They should be able to slide something by the goalie and they should be able to create something, but they're just not. I mean, they're just not creating enough chances for themselves. They're not pushing as much as they should. They're just, they just keep coming from the situation where you have to play from behind. And in terms of energy, in terms of the score at the end of the game, like against the Rangers, they're playing from behind. And in this one, they're playing from behind in terms of their energy because they're just lethargic. They're just not being at the level where they should perform. So in terms of this one, it was a bummer, absolute bummer of a loss. The bright spots are, of course, Justin Brazeau and Danton Heinen, who I mentioned before, have been solid, and they scored the 2 goals in this one. But we can't rely on those guys to carry the Bruins to a Stanley Cup. They're really good at contributing, as we've seen, but where are the top guys? Where's the Marchand? Where's the DeBrusk? Where's, Pasta that are going to be contributing? Pasta, we just saw a great hat trick from him. I was giving him all the praise, and I said last episode that it needs to be Pasta who drives this team forward in their playoff run. He's the star. He's the face of the franchise right now, so he has to be the one to push for you and make you be in a good position come playoff time. And it's just not happening for him right now. So I'm really disappointed in what I've seen in these last 2 games. And now you have a brutal schedule going forward. You have 2 more matchups against the Panthers and the Hurricanes. And this is where you test your playoff mettle, right? Because if you're losing to these teams like the Rangers, and if you lose to the Panthers, and if you lose to the Hurricanes and the Lightning coming up, like, where does that put your fans? It doesn't put them in a place where they feel confident about your odds going forward to win another Stanley Cup for the first time in over a decade. It just doesn't bode well for you if you're losing these games against the top dogs. So this coming up against the Panthers, on the road, the Panthers are just 2 points behind the Bruins in terms of standings. They have, struggled recently. They were on a 4-game streak. They're playing the Flyers tonight, and that'll be an interesting indication. If the Flyers can beat them, then I'll feel better about the Bruins' chances. But if they're able to beat the Flyers and the Bruins just lost to them, I don't know. And the Bruins are on the road. It's going to be a ridiculous atmosphere down in Florida. Every game against the Panthers this year feels personal because of what happened in round 1 of the playoffs last year, where the Bruins were tremendously upset by the Panthers. So this is one that I really want. This is one that I know the fans really want. Because again, it's like you're running out of chances to prove to people that you can do it against the top teams. You needed the one against the Rangers to show people, okay, we can beat this team. It's possible. And now you need this one against the Panthers because you have to prove that you can do it. And they haven't been doing that recently. So this is an important one. And then just a couple days later against the Lightning, you need that one too. Because again, the Lightning are a good team. They're 4th place in the Atlantic right now. So you need to be able to beat these teams and to show people that you're capable of going on runs. And for me, if they can do this, I'll feel a lot better about their chances in the playoffs. If they can close out this stretch well, not just these 2 games, but the rest of the regular season, they have to perform at a high level. Lock down that President's Cup, fingers crossed, and, brighten the fan base's mood. Because if you're losing to these top contenders, the mood and the, expectations for you in the playoffs aren't going to be where they should be. My prediction, I think the Bruins will split these 2 games. I would say they beat the Panthers because they're going to be motivated and they're going to be energized, and the Panthers have struggled recently, as I mentioned, and lose to the Lightning. I wouldn't be surprised if that switched. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost both, and I wouldn't be surprised. I'd be, happy, but I wouldn't be surprised if they won both. They're capable of doing it. But in reality, I think a split is a fair prediction. They have just been so up and down, the Bruins, for these last couple months, really for this whole calendar year so far. So I'll predict a split. Close games in both, though. I don't expect any blowouts for either side. So I'll take they'll win 3-2 against the Panthers, and they'll lose 2-1 against the Lightning. Yeah, take those to the bank. Bruins will split and hopefully be able to branch off and make some progress off of their win, build some momentum to close out the season. All right, let's check in Foxborough. Now, yes, I was at the Revolution game yesterday. If you follow me on Twitter, you may have seen I was just about the only one there. I went with my girlfriend, my sister, and my buddy Millen, and we were basically the only ones in our section. It was pouring rain. It was freezing out. Team hasn't won a game this whole season, so I understand. Allegedly, it was 15K is what I heard the attendance was. I doubt it. It felt more like 1,500. Maybe that was tickets sold, and maybe a lot of people didn't show up, or people were trying to resell, or season ticket holders, whatever it was. There were not 15K people there yesterday. I can promise you that. However, it's not all bad because the Revolution were able to get a point against the Chicago Fire, a 1-1 draw. I gotta be honest, I may or may not have left at halftime, but in my defense, it was freezing cold, it was pouring rain, and it just wasn't an enjoyable game to watch. It was 1-1 right when I left. So, Nacho Hill scored the equalizer in stoppage time at the end of the first half, but we had already determined that we were going to go because, to be honest, they weren't looking like they were going to do anything. The ball was soaking wet, to be fair, and it's tough to play on that turf in those conditions, but the Revs weren't really producing at all. Their build-up play was fine. They just couldn't get that incisive touch, that incisive pass to finish it off. And I feel like that's been sort of the story of these first 6 games of the season, that they've been good in certain aspects, but it's just like the finishing, the attack mentality, the ruthlessness in the final third just hasn't been there. So that needs to improve for sure. But regardless, I did leave at halftime and I watched the rest of the game in my car and ended up being happy that I left because it was a pretty boring half. Besides that one save by Earl Edwards Jr., who I will give his flowers to. Earl Edwards Jr. was actually decent, and it sparked my imagination. Should he be the starting goalkeeper going forward? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I was pretty impressed with Earl Edwards and the way he performed last year after Petrovic was sold. I know that he had some rough goes, but the whole team really had a rough go because of the Bruce Arena situation. So you can't blame just Earl Edwards for what happened at the end of the season. But I thought he played decently yesterday. It was a really bad clearance, or attempted a clearance, that gave Chicago a wide open opportunity. He made a great save to keep it 1-1 and probably earn the Revolution the point that they earned, which I guess is, par for the course, I guess. It's like whatever. It's good to earn a point, but you need to start winning at this point. You need to start getting wins if you're starting off your season 0-5. Porter's schemes, I understand what he's trying to do with the team. I really do. It's like playing from the back, being quick in counterattack, and playing fast, playing forward. But you see the pitfalls of it when a goal is scored like what Chicago scored yesterday, where there's a man completely unmarked, and it's basically like it's a one-on-one, and you won it, obviously. That was the goal that New England conceded. Not to be fair, Romney did get nutmegged pretty bad in the build-up to that goal. But it's tough when you're playing forward so much, and I understand it because the Revs haven't been able to produce so far, but I think that the tactics need to be looked at, checked, adjusted to fit the talent that you have on this team. Whatever Bruce Arena was doing last year with basically the same roster, sans Vrioni, because Gustavo Bo was the starting guy. So whatever he was doing last year was working, and they should figure out a way to not go back to it fully, because that's not the point. You have a new manager who's going to implement his own system, but take what worked from that and try to implement that into your tactics now. I can't pinpoint exactly what it was that was working, but it was working with a very, very similar team. Now, Petrovic helped. Yes, he was probably the best goalkeeper in the MLS last year, but the Revolution were scoring. So what's going on there? Why has Bobby Wood completely fallen off the face of the earth? I thought he was great for us last year. He scored a lot of goals. Ever since Arena left, he was sort of exiled. I know he was dealing with some injury, but he just fell out of the rotation, and this season he hasn't been in the rotation at all. I would try to give him a chance. I don't know what's going on with him specifically. I know he's been dealing with an injury, but I would try to get him back involved. He's been healthy scratches for a lot of the matches so far, because Vrioni is shocking. Let's be honest. He's just not good. I'm sorry. He's not. He just doesn't do anything right. He runs to the wing. His touches aren't good. He doesn't play with any energy. He's lethargic. So, and by the way, I'm not the only one who thinks this, because the few people that were at that game yesterday, you could hear people screaming at Vrioni, both when you're sitting in the stadium and on the broadcast. You'd be able to hear people say, "Vrioni, you suck." He just isn't good. He's not good. I'm so sorry. He needs to be cut from the team. He needs to be transferred somewhere else. He's just not good. So that needs to be done with. There needs to be a new plan that doesn't involve Vrioni, preferably as soon as possible. I don't know if you play Shankala at the 9 for now, but I know he is more of a natural winger. Or if you go to the outside and try to bring in somebody new, or see what Bobby Wood has left in the tank, because he was decent for you last season. There's a lot of options, and I don't think the option is just hope that Vrioni's going to figure it out and be better, because he doesn't seem like he's motivated to do that at all. His play it's not passionate. It doesn't, scream like, I want to be here. I want to be playing for this team. So I don't know the guy personally, so it feels somewhat unfair to question his loyalty to the team or his desire to play for the team. But I'm just going based off the eye test, and what I'm seeing from him on the pitch isn't good enough. So I'm not happy with the way that he's performed at all. I think that they should move on and try to find another option, because at the very least you have to play hard. Like, Nacho Hill isn't the best player, but you could tell he wanted it yesterday. He's playing hard. Carles Hill plays hard. And Nacho Hill, his goal he scored yesterday was absolutely lucky, because the ball was soaking wet and it fell out of the keeper's hands when I think it was Carles who had the initial shot. hits the goalkeeper right in the chest, but it just slips right out, leaks out for Nacho Hill, who's making a run, heads it into the back of the net. That's a hustle play. That's an energy play. So good for him for getting that in, because that obviously saved the game for the Revolution from being their 6th loss to open up the year. But, I like that he plays with such intensity and grit, and you could tell that he wants to be out there. Vrioni, I can't tell that he wants to be out there at all. It just doesn't seem that way. And again, maybe that's unfair because I don't know the guy, but to me, I don't think he's talented enough to be playing with such a lack of energy and oomph. And he hasn't scored. Well, he scored 1 goal, but it was in a losing effort. And besides that, we haven't seen really anything from him all season. So not good stuff from him. I just think there were too many chances yesterday in terms of build-up play and in terms of you have a pass, you have somebody you could find, and they just didn't capitalize on those chances. And it's too many chances to lose, realistically. If you're, dominating the possession in the way that the Revolution were, if you're playing from the front, like yesterday, towards the end of the game, it felt like the Fire were like, okay, we're going to fight for this point. And the Revolution were the ones pushing forward and, going on the attack and trying to get the 3 points, trying to get their first win of the season. But it didn't work out. They just couldn't find that, killer instinct final touch that would just get the ball in the back of the net. It didn't work out, but in that situation, I feel like you need to get a result. That's 3 points, not 1 point. Because 1 point isn't good enough. Draws aren't good enough at this point in the season where you've lost so many games in a row. In terms of talent and how the players played, it's tough to evaluate after this game because it's soaking wet and it's it is what it is. Why isn't Nick Lima starting over Andrew Farrell? I love Andrew Farrell, but he's too slow in the wingback position. I think Nick Lima's a more seamless fit. So I love to see that. And I love Andrew Farrell. I've loved him since I've been a Revolution fan. I know he's been on the team forever, but I think he's better as a substitute. Thought Spalding was good. He subbed in for, not DeJuan Jones. Yeah, he subbed in for Farrell and then switched over to the left side. But he was putting in some pretty good crosses, I thought, making some chances when the Revolution were kind of hard-pressed to find them throughout the whole match. So he was good. But yeah, it is what it is. It really is. Like, the team should be doing better, and they're not. Hopefully Dylan Barrera, whenever he comes back, Blazing Musket, shout out to them. I've actually written some pieces for them. They were reporting that at the end of April, maybe that game against Miami and hopefully Messi is a realistic target for Barrera's return. That would be awesome if he came back and scored his first goal back against Inter Miami and downed them, who, by the way, aren't looking all that great this season. They lost 4-0 yesterday against the New York Red Bulls. So we'll see how that game shapes out. Definitely looking forward to that. It's over a month away, so I won't predict it or anything. But yeah, back to the point. Dylan Barrera should be able to help this team, hopefully. I'm excited for him to come back from that ACL surgery. It'll be a huge lift. So now, luckily looking forward, the Revs have some time to regroup. They have a bye week this week. They're not playing again until April 2nd when they're going to face Club America, who is obviously, in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. I know I've ragged on the CONCACAF Champions Cup, but this is when I actually would start watching it because this should be a great set of games between these two clubs. Club America is the reigning Liga MX champion, so that should be a great game. Good matchup between, realistically, the Revs are going to be underdogs, but they performed really well so far in this tournament, albeit against lesser competition. But I think they'll be pretty motivated. It's they haven't brought home really any silverware besides the Supporters Shield in a very long time. So hopefully they'll be able to beat this team. I think it'd be a really good way for them to gain back their confidence and hopefully let that translate over to league play, which we've been hoping for throughout these first few weeks of the season. Hasn't quite worked out the way that we've wanted it to so far, but hopefully they'll be able to hunker down and get that win. And then the next MLS game is against Charlotte, also not until April, so I'll preview that until as it gets closer. That'll be after the Club America game, and it's another one at home, so hopefully it's nicer out. Hopefully more fans can pack the stadium. Maybe I'll be there again if the tickets are $6 again, because it is a lot of fun to root on the Revs, and it's a great atmosphere. So hopefully they'll be able to lock in, get some results, finally get your season back on track. Same with the Bruins, and for the Celtics, it's just keep on rolling. Now, yes, I didn't talk about the Red Sox today, but next episode is going to be on opening day. So it's going to be before opening day because their first match is it's at like 10 against Seattle. So I will talk about the Red Sox. I promise I'll go over my predictions for their whole season in terms of record, in terms of, MVP for us throughout the season. So I'll be talking all about the Red Sox. I'm looking forward to that. Also, fingers crossed, I think we are going to have Maz on the next episode, Tony Maserati from Felger and Maz. We do have that booked right now. It might end up not being until Sunday because, as you can assume, he's a very busy man. But that should be the next guest on the show. So we're getting some very high-profile guests on here, trying to just grow, trying to get better, and, having some great opportunities to interview some local legends. So very thankful for Chris Forsberg coming on today, taking the time to do that interview. Means a whole lot. So if you're listening, thank you so much. Thanks everyone so much for tuning in. As always, this is Titletown Talk with your host, Jackson Tolliver. I'll see you next time.